At that point, you had the Republican Congress saying that they did not believe in nation building, they believed in an America First foreign policy. In 1996, the entire Republican establishment got behind Bob Dole, and yet Pat Buchanan came very close to stopping Bob Dole. Thanks to the work of people like Drew Iverson here in Iowa, Pat Buchanan came very close to getting the Republican nomination and was only stopped really because the establishment threw absolutely everything it had into both Bob Dole and then also Steve Forbes as a kind of trick to distract people away from Mr. Buchanan. But the establishment was really worried. The neocons saw that their power was slipping away. Luckily for them, they had cultivated the Australian billionaire Rupert Murdoch, and they got Murdoch to set up a new magazine called the Weekly Standard, which would promote neoconservative ideology. It also gave them a foot in the door right from the beginning with Fox News, which was also funded by Rupert Murdoch. So the neocons were trying to create a media empire, but they were aware that at the grassroots, they did not have the momentum. They wanted John McCain to be the nominee in 2000, and of course he wasn't. What they wound up doing is, the neocons are very smart. They used a sort of backdoor strategy with George W. Bush. Even though they preferred that John McCain be the nominee in 2000, they insinuated enough people into Bush's campaign, and Bush, didn't really have firm principles of his own, that their people would be in position, if Bush did win the nomination, to direct him in the way that neoconservatives such as William Kristol at the Weekly Standard wanted. And that's precisely what they did. And of course, what finally gave Bush conservatism and neoconservatism a shot in the arm and really allowed it to become quite powerful and even monopolistic for a short time was the 9/11 attacks. And the neocons were prepared to capitalize on all of that in order to expand the power of the presidency and really try to throw out any conservative who said, well, you know what, there actually wasn't anyone from Iraq involved in the 9/11 attacks. How can it possibly make logical sense to go to war with that particular country over this act of terrorism? The neocons played their cards very well for a while. Although what they didn't plan on was Ron Paul. They did not plan on Ron Paul, who had built up such a great record in Congress throughout the many years, both voting in a libertarian manner and a pro-constitutional manner, and also having very solid credentials as a Christian conservative. That Ron Paul, when he decided to run in 2008, really reawakened people to what real conservatism was. And you could see the results instantaneously. He had a hard core of libertarian support for many, many years, thanks to the Mises Institute and other organizations. But really, conservatives who had been sort of Goldwaterites back in the 1960s, people who had supported Pat Buchanan in the 1990s, as soon as Ron Paul got in the race in 2008, they kind of instantly recognized where he was coming from. They knew the genuine article, and they knew that everyone else in the field was an imposter and a fraud. So at that point, I think, again, we have... Thanks to Ron Paul, we again have a chance to kind of bring conservatism back to its roots, and I think the Campaign for Liberty has been doing a magnificent job with that, thanks to conferences like this, thanks to the work of people like Tom Woods as well. Tom has done just marvelous work, not only... Well, the thing that happened with a lot of Austrian economics is that conservatives said, well, this is really just for libertarians and for people, maybe even for market anarchists. But this is not something that conservatives really need to take an interest in. What Tom has done, though, is that Tom, while being completely, pro-liberty and completely in favor of, the smallest possible state, absolutely, if that means zero, then great. Tom has also been able to communicate with Christian conservatives and bring the message to them and show them that Austrian economics is something they should learn and that, in fact, represents the correct way of looking at economic questions. So I'm really encouraged by the fact that we're now bringing together a lot of forces, a lot of authentically conservative forces, which have been split up and driven apart by neoconservative plans, by just the mere sort of contingencies of the Cold War, that we now have a chance to kind of rebuild what ought to be an authentic conservative movement, and it has a very good shot at doing all the things that it had always hoped to do, including ending the welfare state and getting back to a purely constitutional policy, both in our foreign policy and also right here at home. Now we have a lot of difficulties ahead of us, but I think that the main thing to be aware of in looking at conservative history is not to make the same mistakes that were made by the Cold War conservative movement. Don't just define yourself by your opposition, whether it's to communism as it was back then, or whether it's even to statism now. Rather, you've got to define yourself also by what is positive. You have to define yourself by your loyalty to the Constitution, by your loyalty overall to the sort of framework of freedom and a rule of law which permits people to live together despite their differences. That's something that, again, Ron is always quite correct to emphasize that. Freedom brings people together. Liberty brings people together. And things that cannot be resolved otherwise, philosophical differences that might drive people apart and lead to civil conflicts that can then let the government grow, can all be assuaged thanks to a framework of federalism and a framework of liberty. So we have to be careful. We have to continue to organize. That's the positive lesson we can take from the history of the conservative movement. We can look at the way they took the Barry Goldwater campaign of 1960, built on that to one that could win the Republican nomination in 1964, and then built on that even after Goldwater did not succeed in beating Lyndon Johnson in November of '64. Nevertheless, conservatives continued to organize and build even larger organizations. They continued to start think tanks and grassroots groups, and really created something that was so powerful that it was able to boost Ronald Reagan in 1976 in the Republican primaries, ultimately get him both the nomination and win the White House in 1980. We can learn a great many organizational techniques from them, and that's exactly what we need to do, while at the same time being aware of what the cardinal failure of the Cold War conservative movement was, which was that they defined themselves by their opposition to communism as opposed to their support for the Constitution. That allowed people who claimed to oppose communism but who in fact had no loyalty to the Constitution to present themselves as authentic conservatives, and that confused people. And then, of course, the fact that there was a wedge driven between libertarians and Christian conservatives was really what allowed the neocons to divide and rule. And I think now we've learned the lessons of history. We have wonderful new organizations that are fighting for liberty and constitutional conservatism today. And as a result, we're going to we have a very good fighting chance for all that we are in very dire times, for all that our military is overstretched abroad, for all that Barack Obama has taken over the healthcare system and is continuing to expand his power. Nevertheless, because we have a clear idea now of who we are and of what steps are necessary to be made in order to retake the country and take back conservatism from the people who have misled us into the morasses that President Bush took us into, I think we now have a chance to take back the right, take back conservatism, and restore the Constitution.